Good afternoon. I'm Jim Cahill, Director of Facilities Planning here at UMass. I'm also Chair of the Green Building Design Committee. And I'd like to welcome you to today's lecture on sustainable scales of sorry. This is the fifth lecture of a six-part lecture series on sustainable design solutions for the built environment. And the series is presented by the Green Building Design Committee, a subcommittee of the Campus Environmental Performance Advisory Committee. It was formed a few years ago. The Green Building Committee is teamed with facilities planning, campus planning, landscape architecture and regional planning, architecture and design, and historical preservation initiative in the College of Humanities and Fine Arts, and environmental conservation to present this series with a goal of expanding our knowledge and commitment to sustainability on the campus. And I'd like to thank all of these cooperators for their efforts and support in bringing this event to you, with special thanks to our green building researchers, Kathy McCusker, Katrina Spade, Bill Stanton, and Lawson Walson, who is here today on the camera, for their efforts in organizing this series, and landscape architecture and regional planning in the Zuby Lecture Series, which is co-sponsoring today's lecture. A lot of work has gone into organizing the series, and we're hoping that you'll enjoy today's lecture and other lectures in the series. And we're also interested in your feedback, so on your seat is a short survey, and we very much like your feedback, because we are going to sponsor other things perhaps like this in the future, and we'd like to know the success of this lecture series, and it's very important that you fill out the survey, so please do. And next week we'll be doing our final lecture, and it'll be by Bruce Coleman, the principal of the local firm Coleman and Hartman, and his lecture is titled The Living Building Challenge, Why Bother? It'll be in the Cape Cod Lounge on Tuesday, November 15th at 4 o'clock, so hopefully see you all there. And today's lecture is hosted by Jack Ahern, Vice Provost and Director of the International Programs Office. But before introducing Jack, I want to introduce Frank Sligers, who is going to talk to you briefly before Jack introduces the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jim. I just want to announce this weekend we have a last two tours of Collation 7, Lyman Street Art Intervention, by myself, Elizabeth Engridson, Kari Foster, Doris Huang, and Eric Wojcicki. And we will have a tour starting at 12 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday, starting at the UMass Design Center at Court Square. And this week, or this will be a special event because I finally my personal artwork up, Community Spirit, but you will see also other artwork done by our students, temporary art pieces done on one property on Lyman Street. We'll also see a public artwork by Robert Markey and other artwork in Springfield on a 1 to 2 hour guided tour. So I welcome you to come, and I will leave these outside, and I'm happy to answer further questions after this lecture. Thank you.
Good. Okay, well, thank you, Jim, and thanks to the Facilities Planning and the Green Building Committee for co-sponsoring the lecture. Please do complete the survey. It's important to have the feedback. It helps us to justify this if we know that you appreciate it and that you learn from it. Believe me, it helps us. So take a minute to do that, please. It's my pleasure to introduce Cindy Sanders. Lucinda, or Cindy Sanders, is a partner and CEO of Olin, a landscape architecture, urban design, and planning firm with studios in Philadelphia and Los Angeles. She's also an adjunct professor in the University of Pennsylvania's Landscape Architecture Department. Cindy was raised in New England and studied landscape architecture at Rutgers University. She was inspired early on by the work of urban sociologist William H. White. And later, at Hanna Olin, she worked on the redesign of Bryant Park, where William H. White advised them, of course people are trapped in there. There aren't enough ways for people to move in and out. You have to change that. And they did.
and elegantly. And in the process, they brought a social conscience to landscape architecture and showed how that conscience can transform and recover what is now one of the most beloved public parks in New York City. We go there regularly on our New York City trip every year, and it's easy to find. It's smack in the middle of Manhattan on 42nd Street. I met Cindy as a classmate at the University of Pennsylvania MLA program, where we studied under Ian McHarg, Laurie Olin, Bob Hanna, and many other notable and gifted teachers. I recall our first assignment in sketching class with Laurie Olin. We were drawing paper bags, and Cindy's sketches were praised. Laurie said, you know, that's what you should be doing. You know? And the rest of us, he said, you know, keep trying, you know, keep at it, you know, you might get there. But, it's amazing to me how great teachers can often recognize great talent so early in its development. You know, it's amazing. That was like our second week at Penn. You know? Here you are, look where you are. You know? After Penn, Cindy went to work at Hanna Olin, and she never left. She worked her way, quite literally, from entry level to CEO of one of the world's great design firms. There's certainly a role model for you students to emulate. Cindy's most recent projects include the Central Delaware Riverfront Master Plan in Philadelphia and Hemisphere Park Master Plan in San Antonio, Texas. Cindy's dedicated and generous in her professional service. She's president of the Landscape Architecture Foundation. She was recently inducted as fellow to the ASLA for her contributions to the advancement of the profession. She also serves on the Landscape Journal editorial board and the ASLA CEO Roundtable. She contributed to the Sustainable Sites Initiative through her service on the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center Advisory Board. Fritz Steiner, Dean of the College of Architecture at UT Austin, described Cindy to me as a steadfast, intelligent leader with both an ambitious vision and her feet on the ground. I think it's very true and right on. At Olin, Cindy has worked with many of the world's great architects, including I.M. Pei, Harry Cobb, Frank Gehry, and Richard Mayer. Olin's work has made or remade many of the great urban landscapes in the world's great cities with award-winning works, including Battery Park City Promenade, Columbus Circle, Bryant Park and Wagner Park in New York City, the Getty Center in Los Angeles, Canary Wharf in London, Villa Olympica in Barcelona, the Stata Center at MIT, right down the road in Cambridge, Independence Hall in Philadelphia, the National Gallery of Art Sculpture Garden and Washington Monument Landscape, both on the Mall at Washington, D.C. These are among many of the beautifully illustrated and documented projects in the book Placemaking, published by Olin. Hand me that book. It's a lovely book, and when you see the body of work that's represented in here, you'll know what I mean. It's really a gift to the world. Cindy's optimistic about the future of our profession. In the placemaking book, she notes, while we cannot impose complete control, we can push the boundaries of thinking, and we can continue to exert pressure to grasp the significance and depth of sustainability. That must be in the realm of great design. We're very fortunate to have Cindy here today to hear her thoughts on the scales of resilience. So please join me in giving a very warm UMass welcome to Cindy Sanders.
That was incredibly nice, and I don't know if I can live up to all those incredibly kind words that you spoke, Jack. And I also want to thank you, Jack, for your leadership and many of the lives that you have touched over your career. It's been pretty phenomenal. I wanted to talk about scales of resilience. One of the things that wasn't said about me is before I went to study landscape architecture, I actually studied philosophy. And so one of the things that wasn't said about me was this philosophical bent that I have. I tend to like to reflect on things quite a bit. And it occurred to me that our profession has changed a lot. I mean, from the days Jack and I were in school together, but it's not that we've left what we did back then and we're doing something else. I see this pattern of accretion. And it's pretty phenomenal for me to stop and think about some things that we've asked students to do historically and the things that we're asking them to do now. And we're adding on to what it is that they need to do and know about. Even back when Jack and I were in school, people said landscape architects are generalists. Well, my sense is that landscape architects need to come to the table to be prepared to have many, many conversations. And it's not that you need to be an expert, but we need to be able to not only have those conversations, but I believe lead those conversations. I think it's no longer enough for us to be followers. We are synthesizers. We are the great synthesizers of the world. And it's incumbent upon us to be able to have those multiple conversations. So with that, I was thinking about this topic of resilience and what it is we're being asked to do when we're asked to contemplate a problem in an environment. We're asked to make change of some sort, to have an impact of some kind. And as I thought back over my career, I was thinking, wow, you know, the scale of what we're being asked to do is changing, but so is the complexity of what we're being asked to do. We're being asked to consider systems today that perhaps weren't as so much in the forefront. And I would also add that part of another confusion that gets thrown into this mix is all clients are not created equal. They don't all have the same degree of sophistication or the same degree of background, or they may have something they really need to solve. And that's more important than worrying about stormwater. You know, their social problem is more important than worrying about stormwater. And so that's where their focus is. And as landscape architects, you know, I think we tend to be somewhat idealistic. We want to give the clients the benefit of all of what we have to offer. And it's very hard sometimes to only give a piece or feel that all they want is a piece of what you have to offer. I really see the earth moving out there in regard to this. I'm finding clients who are demanding a lot more than oftentimes what's being taught in universities. So what do I mean by that? Well, we all are familiar, I think, with sustainable sites and what's going on with sustainable sites. Most universities at this moment are not teaching how to think about the performative qualities of landscapes. It's one of the things that I do at the Landscape Architecture Foundation is really think about the performative qualities and the measurements of these landscapes that we're designing. And we have a program that gives scholarships to students to work on this, and they're like, wow, you know, we've never thought about this stuff before. So things that are being asked for actually in the client world, in some cases, students are not yet equipped to do, nor are the professionals, I mean, quite honestly. So we're in this kind of transitional period. On the one hand, on the other hand, we're very fond of saying in our office that if you want to know what kind of project is coming down the pike in 10 years, and step into a university. Find out what they're doing there, what they're thinking about, because that's what you're going to be asked to do 5, 10 years down the road, and that's oftentimes very, very true. So there's this interesting dynamic that's going on. So that's by way of introduction. These scales of resilience that I think about are the ways that we as a professional have been asked to bring cities back to life, portions of cities back to life. What is it that we've been asked to do? And I do think that our scales are very different, and we are being asked to work at multiple scales. And so what I did, maybe we want to have the lights here, I don't know. What I did is I broke this topic into 5 different categories. One that I called the spot, the core, the patch, the strand, and the warp and the weft. And these will become clear as we move through. So what I did is I picked 9 projects, 2 from each category and 1 from the last, to have this conversation. Most, not all of our practice is urban. These are snippets of cities from New York to Philadelphia to San Francisco to Cincinnati to San Antonio, to illustrate some of the points that I'm hoping to talk about today. And so the spot is a project typology, if you will, that has usually a very local kind of impact, and it serves primarily the occupants of a structure. Where do these come from? They're usually developer driven, they may be corporate driven, they may be institutionally driven, and they're largely socially focused. That's not to say that people don't have a sustainable agenda behind them, but the genesis of it is, let's do something for the folks in the building. And so the first project is the Gap headquarters in San Francisco. In an incredible site. It's part of the reoccupation of the industrial waterfront. It was a very dubious client who wanted to have a terrace, a roof terrace. So this is the image up on top of the roof, the sketch we did up on top of the roof. Don Fisher, who has since passed away, was one of the largest collectors of modern art. And it was really driven by the style scheme that we put forward to him, that he was very interested in. But he was a skeptic. He didn't believe people would actually go out there and use the space. And in fact, it became wildly popular. Everybody who works at the Gap is under 30, and they just loved it. And why wouldn't you when you have a view like that? Even in the San Francisco climate. And so just very locally, this project brought about a social component that was very consistent, I think, with the corporate mission of the Gap. And we also had fun with it because even though the plan's symmetrical, all the planting kind of comes from different regions, if you will. It's inspired by sort of the arid west and the damp northwest and the Mediterranean. So we use the microclimate around the building to inform the design and to develop the design. Did the client really care about that aspect of it? You know, they didn't ask us to do that, but we had fun with it. Nobody asked us anything about creating a habitat, and probably one of the most exciting moments I had was being on the rooftop and seeing a bunch of hummingbirds up there. And it was really spectacularly fun. Another local project that is under construction now is Carnegie Hall. And we all know Carnegie Hall. It's a fabulous institution, and they wanted to put a garden on the rooftop. Their employees are young, they're sustainably minded, they're socially minded, yet it was very interesting to me as we were moving forward with this project, which has a sliver of a view to Central Park. What beyond the social component could we think about? What could we do to bring life back and to enhance life and to take advantage of the relationship to Central Park? And this project started out with, this is going to not only be for the employees, but it's going to be an event space. It's going to be occupied in the daytime, and it's going to have these incredible nighttime functions. Well, reality set in, and code set in, and the historic review board set in and said, no, you can't do that stuff. And so it became a commerce space. It became a space where we're very concerned about reflectivity. The stormwater component that we promoted got value engineered out, one of those atrocious words that came out of the late 20th century. And I said to them, you're going to be kind of sad that you did this, because by the time this is built, you will be sad that you can't promote your building around a stormwater agenda. Well, that wasn't enough to sell them. We tried at every turn we have to include these agendas. And again, this is a planting scheme that is very responsive to microclimate. There's intense shade that occurs up here. But again, these are two projects that I've illustrated that I called the spot because they're local, their impact is quite local. The core tends to be have a vital urban impact at or near the center of the city. So this image is in Cincinnati, and it has the potential to significantly alter the daily lives of people as they move about the city. Who worries about these problems? Well, developers, usually very smart developers, and cities, spurred on by mechanisms of private advocacy. Things like Center City Development Corporations would be an example of what I'm talking about. Oftentimes these places are very connected to moments of transportation, cars, buses, trains, parking garages, that sort of thing. And so this was a project we were asked to do in Cincinnati. It's called Fountain Square, and it was one of these places in the city where everything was wrong about it that had been renovated and built in the 1970s. We came in with an agenda. The client wanted to reactivate the downtown. That was what they were after. Retail had basically left the city. People were not living downtown. And so the goal was to use this as a catalyst. This was our scheme, but more important than our scheme was making a space where people could come together and enjoy simply being together. This fountain is an historic fountain. We actually moved it into this location. But what was really behind all of this, I know you can't read this from here, from where you are. This is, and I'll show you a blow-up of it. This is a programming diagram that we did. We went through laboriously, month by month, to say, what can you do in this square? And we built it thematically around the fountain, who we named the lady. And so here's an example of in the spring. It has everything to do with using the lady as a moment of celebration, as a moment of awakening, as a moment of warmth, as a moment of rebirth. And we developed a series of events that could happen seasonally, that can happen weekly, that can happen daily. And lo and behold, that is exactly how this park was ultimately conceived of. Everything from wintertime celebrations and New Year's Eve, the fun with skating, summertime farmers markets, dancing in the evening, and most importantly, that it feels comfortable on a day-to-day basis, just to be there, even when there isn't an event going on. I think it's safe to say that this project did contribute toward reigniting the heart of the city. You know, a little tidbit for all of you to think about. The maintenance and operations of a park over a 20-year period costs more than the investment in the park. And so part of the conversations that you as landscape architects need to be able to have with your clients is when they come to you and say, we have a $5 million project, it's okay. Who's thinking about the maintenance? Who's thinking about the funding for that maintenance? Because we all know that much failure went on in parks around the lack of maintenance. I find that to be a very interesting statistic, and this is what I mean about pushing sort of the boundaries of our conversations. One of the other things about those program elements that were on that calendar, everything we did had to be sized, much like an architect would develop a program for a building and size everything. Everything had to be sized, and because all those events are taking place, one needs to design the space for that flexibility. The other project that I'm calling the core is Comcast. Comcast sits on this rail line. Okay, so here's, I don't know where the pointer is. Here we are. So here's 30th Street Station, Suburban Station, down to the Gallery in Market East. So this is the regional rail line. This project was underpinned by a very enlightened developer. JFK, the street itself was a highly dysfunctional street. It was much like a canyon. I want you to remember this image because the last image in this particular series is the same view. This project is about the layers. The rail line that is below, that as I said runs from 30th Street to Market East, the concourse where people come up from below, and then our project here where the Comcast tower sits in the plaza. So what this developer was doing was absolutely hooking into the fact that this was on a regional line stop. This is Suburban Station. So people were coming up from below, flowing through Suburban Station into their building below and coming up. That was the concept behind it. The majority of people who commute into Philadelphia actually commute using regional rail. It's more than half as opposed to driving. So this is the food court that they had downstairs, and their whole strategy to developing this food court was to utilize businesses from Philadelphia. So if any of you have been, the Reading Terminal, it has a similar philosophy. And as you rise up from the food court into the lobby, this is what you see. There is a screen, one of the largest LED screens that changes constantly. It has many, many mutations through the different scenes, and you'll never see the same thing twice unless you stand there for something, I forget. You have to stand there for 50 days to see a repeat. It's pretty amazing. And they use this for holiday shows and whatnot. And people gather. It's really one of the fun things about this screen is we actually had an idea before this idea happened on the lobby. We said it would be fun to have a digital screen outside and to have it interactive, to have it as an art piece, to have it as an information piece. They were worried about its maintainability, but it was the seed that actually gave birth to this larger interior screen. And in fact, when you stand outside of the building, it has a dominant presence in the landscape. standing in the building looking out, it's a very layered landscape. The plaza to accommodate people coming and going, the fountain, the trellis, the cafe, the trees beyond. Remember, JFK was not the most wonderful street. This is the plan with the plaza and the layers that I just described, the sidewalk. This developer was so good, instead of stopping at the property line, he said, nope, we're gonna take it all the way to the street. This developer talks to the folks in the city, advocates for great design, for giving to the public. And that's what I mean when I say an enlightened developer. So a view from above with green roofs. This project does have a stormwater agenda. All of the water that's collected on the roofs and across the plaza is captured and circulated and filtered and used in the fountain. This green roof, this is Suburban Station. This green roof is actually a pad for a twin to Suburban Station. I wouldn't hold my breath that it's going to happen anytime soon in this economy, but in the meantime, there is a pretty decent looking green roof there. As I said, the plaza is really about circulation. It's the coming and going of people, the gathering of people. They do hold events there. There's a gathering place for people to have their lunch. This is, by the way, a LEED Platinum building. The cafe is a place where people can sit and pay to have lunch. And then the sidewalk. So this is that view that I said, remember the view down JFK. This is what it looks like today. Bringing that social energy out to the sidewalk. Olin forever has had this mission statement about making places that enhance lives. I mean, that's what we do first and foremost. If we don't do that, we think that our projects are failures. And we're trying to layer and do more on top of them. These two projects have had a very significant impact on the cities in which they were built. So the patch. The patch is a larger territory. Who controls these land holdings? Well, it's usually universities, cities, larger organized bodies. There's a new social and environmental system usually being made, and it's being plugged into existing systems of the city. So this idea that projects don't occur in isolation, but they're actually part of a bigger system. It's what we call the polyvalent or multivalent landscape. Okay, so this was a project that we were not awarded. It's Wagner Park. It was a competition, but it was one of my favorite, and I saw the mayor just a year ago. It was several years after the competition, and he said, Cindy, I was really afraid of your project. It was so incredible. Everybody loved it, but we thought we couldn't do it. I said, oh, next time, tell me these things. You know, we can talk. But anyway, I suppose that kind of compliment is okay. So it was really built around a couple of very big ideas. It's down in San Antonio, and we were very interested in the prairie, and in particular the Blackland Prairie as it headed south. This is the breadbasket of America. We were very interested in the ecoregions and how they came together right around this park. We hired an ecologist. We hired the folks out of Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. I say we hired. I guess we were all sort of donating our time. But I think there was a small stipend, and so we did pay them something small. But they were incredible in taking us around, helping us to understand the local ecology. and also the water. The water organization in Texas is very interesting. This is the Balcones Escarpment and the aquifer, and what's very interesting is all of the major cities, Waco, Austin, San Antonio, they're all located along that red arc that you see, with reason, right? People settled near water. It makes a lot of sense, and water is a huge issue. Steve Windhager, who now is the executive director of Santa Barbara Botanic Garden, he's moved on from Lady Bird Johnson. It's his belief that water is our limiting factor. Very interesting, I think, and profound kind of topic. We also had to plug into the county system, the county park system, and think about what's that potential. This is a city that doesn't have a grand park system. It's a city, 7th largest city in America. It has grown not by getting denser, it's actually grown by spreading out. And there was never really a grand plan for the parks. So having those conversations with them at this scale, we felt was very important. And then the site itself. You know, most people would walk onto this site and say, oh, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. Well, in reality, it's a heavily grazed site, and there was a lot of damage that had gone on to the ecosystems. And this was really us getting sort of an education about these different systems and the management of them, and what happened to these systems if left to their own devices. What was their natural state of evolution from a grassland to a savanna to a woodland, and what does fire and what does grazing do to those systems? And so we were very interested in presenting to the client. Maybe that's why we didn't get the job, because we said you had to burn this landscape to manage it, because we were very interested in bringing the prairie and reviving the prairie in this park. But these were topics that we were quite concerned with. We were also very concerned with the idea of carbon sequestration. Turns out the prairie is one of the best sequesters of carbon. We're also very concerned about recharging the groundwater, because while this didn't sit right over the aquifer, it was feeding the aquifer. And this was the scheme that we developed that brought the prairie through the park as the feature, as well as edging it with the woodland. So when I talk about these systems that we think about, this is what I'm suggesting. Everything from the groundwater aquifer and the water bodies that sit on the top, feeding the groundwater aquifer, the different vegetative systems from the shortgrass savanna, the meadows, the cacti, lawn areas, the middle canopy, so which is where the prairie sat, and the upper canopy, the treed canopy. The circulation systems that were embedded in that, everything from cars to pedestrians and bicycles, people moving at different speeds, and then different infrastructural moves in the form of different programmatic components, including architectural elements. And that was the view that we had. There was a major highway that crossed through it, so connecting one side to the other, but also connecting these ecological and social systems together. The idea that man and woman can inhabit a very rich and diverse and responsible, environmentally responsible landscape very much lay behind the thinking of our proposal. I'm glad the facilities folks are here. Because Yale is my other example, the Science Hill project, my other example of the patch. And historically, campuses have been thought of as building by building. We will get a donor for this building, and the architect will hire a landscape architect, and they'll fight over which dollars go to landscape or building. I don't know if that's what happens here, but finally we were able to convince Yale, please stop thinking about this project building by building and little landscape courtyard by landscape courtyard. You must think about this project as one cohesive tissue, because it actually connects everything together. And that was a major victory for us. And so this is Science Hill with many different buildings by many different architects in here, but one vision for the landscape. And what that enables us to do is actually, again, to think about these systems. Whoops, what did I do here? Hold on. To think about these systems, the circulation system up above, here, the spaces for people, so kind of quad spaces, the spaces for water, for collecting and recharging, reusing water in buildings, the spaces for materials and handling, and then not only the buildings, but the buildings below grade, because landscapes, as we know, more commonly are made over buildings that sit below grade. This was a major breakthrough, this conversation. We have done a lot of university work piece by piece by piece, and so this was quite big. Everything, we thought about everything from the streetscape systems, how these different streetscapes hook into the project at hand, the different circulation systems within the project, and the water. I mean, just to give you an example, this is the biology building, this is the landscape that's created, and this is what's under that landscape. So why was this type of collection system put here? Because this is the geological place on this particular piece of the campus where one can recharge. There's a lot of gravel, the glaciated landscape, and this happens to be a very large deposit of gravel and a good place to recharge. And so this was a very site-specific response to that condition. But it all has to be engineered and thought about very carefully. Another one is our Yale University Carroon Hall School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. A landscape that's over structure. This landscape is a very social landscape, and it's used for, used for graduations and whatnot. But this piece of water is probably our most sophisticated water collection and recirculation system yet, because the plants in it actually remove some of the finer pollutants. And this is what it will look like when it's more mature. And this is the system that underlies it. And so here we are collecting water from the rooftop and circulating it, cleansing it through the system, putting it in the tank, filtering it, and reusing it back up in the building for other purposes, such as flushing toilets, etc. This is what I mean when I say that landscape architects need to advocate. They need to be able to promote these agendas. They need to be able to stick with it, because these conversations, quite honestly, are long. They can sometimes be tedious if you're not an engineer, but they're very important for us to be able to have. Okay, the strand. The strand is a linear version of the patch, with the exception of the fact that there's a dominant movement. One is trying to encourage or reinforce. yet this force needs to be negotiated. So oftentimes a strand, not only are you moving along it, but you have to get across it. Much like the patch, there is a new social and environmental system being made and is being plugged into an existing system in the city or metropolitan region. So it's not sitting in isolation, but it's actually plugging into other things. So who controls these linear land holdings? And now you can see where these conversations are going to get more complex. Oftentimes the answer is cities control these linear land holdings, but cities are made up of diverse entities. And when systems transect multiple jurisdictions, the work becomes harder for us to implement. Oftentimes private ownership may interrupt the linear flow, which has been a very big issue on the Mill River project, and it's a very big issue on the Delaware project. Okay, so here's Mill River, downtown Connecticut, Stamford, Connecticut. The river flows into the Sound, and in fact, the way the river was set up, this is the downtown, and then residential neighborhoods. So it was kind of a divide, and it was treated as a social divide within the city. The river also had been dammed and had been contained. It's an old mill town. And as a result of that damming, there was a lot of flooding that occurred in the downtown. So when the agenda, we had to work with the Army Corps of Engineers to take out the dam. The agenda was to contain and control that flooding. And to develop a park with many different programmatic elements, of which these are just a few. To be able to describe your park in different ways, very important. Where are the cultural attributes? What are the highly experiential? Where can people get down to the river? What's going on with planting? Where are the canopy trees? Where are the ground planes? How are we going to build it out? How will it be phased? This has become a major topic because this project is being done through a public-private partnership, and many of the dollars are coming from private donors as well as from TIF financing, and believe me, they're going after every kind of grant they can find to try to underwrite this project. And so there are a couple of different programmatic strategies that we use. Those spaces and places that are up near the street are the ones that have the more civic kind of agenda associated with them. And we had to work and demonstrate to the city how these spaces could be configured and used at different times. There's another piece of the park that has a porch that overlooks the river and a carousel, and by gosh, they just got a donor for this carousel, so it's happening bit by bit. Down by the river, it's a much more native palette. It's really designed to take the flooding. It's designed to get people closer to the river, moving along the river. It's designed to reinstill the habitat that had moved away because of the neglect and the damming. The waters are going to be much cleaner, a lot less sediment moving through them. There's also an anticipated recreational component with the hope that it can be used for kayaking. The city sees this as a 30-year plan, ultimately. Okay, and so what have they done? The first thing they did was to build a playground. I found this to be incredible because what we did is we put the armature in for the playground, meaning that we put the walls, we put the steps, and we made a platform. And the collaborative got all of the citizens together, and over 5 days, they built this playground. They built it themselves. And that was a real gesture of community making. I think it's one of the things that I'm witnessing more and more of, is this kind of regeneration from the ground up rather than just from the top down. The other piece of this project that's gone forward, the dam is gone and the river is flowing freely. So this piece from the black fencing is where the Army Corps work has happened. So we had to, and again, we had the ecologist on board. We were interfacing with the Army Corps, and these J-hooks and vanes are very much designed as part of the flow of the river. The Army Corps didn't build them properly, and so the ecologist has had to come back up, and they're working on restructuring them. This is the rest of the park that will be built over the next 2 years. So it's happening, but it's happening very, very slowly. I say the rest of the park, the rest of the first phase, if you will. Another corridor that we have worked on is up in Syracuse, the connective corridor. And this is an idea of connecting the university to the downtown. Syracuse is a city that's losing population. It's a city that does not have much of a downtown population, and businesses are leaving. So this idea of making a corridor that connected and developing 2 nodes initially within that corridor. And this is what part of the corridor looks like. The idea was to do a very surgical intervention with the bikeway, with the trees, and with some lighting, as well as some signage. And this became kind of an identity remaking, if you will. Pentagram was our consultant who worked with us. And they came up with this idea of the U's in Syracuse. So very clever, and have started to implement it throughout the downtown. And in some of these nodes that we're working on, these nodes are actually being built. So we have the highway, which cuts off one of these nodes. You know, we'll see that kind of intervention, again, as a wayfinding element, as an identity element, used on the bridge. And you can see the bridge in the background. This park, as I say, is being built right now. And then at the other end, down by the warehouse, and so what Syracuse did was they actually moved the architecture department down there for a couple of years while renovation was occurring in their building on campus. And that actually was an infusion of people, and that infusion of people kind of turned this into a node. And this is one of the other projects that's being worked on. But using the infrastructure, the existing infrastructure, and making something of it, and making a place that people recognize and understand that there's an identity and a desirable place to be. The work in the weft, this idea implies a very large territory. Many of these territories have become available as a result of the industrialization. So many of the waterfronts that you think about, yet the deindustrialization might not be entirely complete, so that we have multiple uses that have to coexist in many of these plans. And ownership, as I mentioned before, is generally extremely compromised in these environments. Cities may or may not be organized to even begin to entertain the question of what to do with these very vast territories. This is the Philadelphia waterfront, and it is quite a complex place. If I had to characterize it, I'd say there are these industrial relics that are pretty phenomenal. People come to the waterfront really for big celebrations, and that's it. Penn's Landing. There are neighborhoods that surround the waterfront that are close to the waterfront but are cut off by I-95. And there's still active port uses that go along on the waterfront. We like this diagram because while this was our project site, it's nearly 7 miles long, and it was massive. I couldn't imagine, how do you even think about a landscape that is that big? This is I-95. This is the center of the city, Penn's Landing today. Our project area was pretty much this entire spot. People think of the waterfront as this blue, but then there's this odd kind of yellow place that we call the interstitial zone that most people hadn't really thought too much about. We had a big team of folks. We were a sub-consultant. We did not lead this particular project, but firms like Field Operations are leading projects like this in Seattle and asking many of these questions, you know, and it has to be asked city by city because every city is different. One of the things that we realized, you know, Philadelphia is not New York City. It's not Boston. The ability, what is the potential to even develop on the waterfront? Where are people going to come from to live? We don't have a strong market in Philadelphia, and there are great neighborhoods in Philadelphia that people do love to live in. So how do we maximize that potential? And very interestingly, the team and the client came up with this idea that the waterfront really needs to be characterized by a rich variety of open spaces, surrounded by high density, low and mid-rise development. And this is important. The vision in everybody's mind were towers. We're going to put towers along the waterfront. Well, towers don't do anything for the life on the street. They absolutely kill street life. And Philadelphia is a city made of neighborhoods. Very pedestrian oriented. So this idea of containing and capping heights on buildings and thinking 4, 5, 6, maximum 8 stories, but a very dense arrangement of them was something that people bought into. So that's a good strategy, but then how do you think about the landscape? How do you think about making landscape here? One of the first things we did was to set about to determine where are the parks. And there's a lot more analysis behind this, but this is kind of a distillation of it. All the gray circles are existing parks within a 5-minute walking distance. Everything that's red is a void, so it's underserved. This started to give us a clue, and we said, aha, what if we made parks within a 5-minute walking distance along the waterfront? And that gave rise to a park on average every half mile and at the end of key streets. So connecting back into the city and giving this rhythm. Social equity and justice was very much an idea that underpinned the development of the landscape of this waterfront. This plan of parks then gets connected by a trail that goes north to south and ties back into the city through the key streets. We also were very concerned about water. It's still a shipping channel, and the shipping channel is on the Philadelphia side, and so it's the more eroded side, if you will, due to the wave action. Many cities, Philadelphia is not unusual, have a CSO, a combined sewer system. So every time it rains, it mixes with the sewage and overflows into the river. This was of concern to us. Philadelphia is one of the more progressive cities today in thinking about how to minimize the water that's going into the storm sewer system, and they're trying to incentivize people to treat it locally. Concerns about the floodplain. Where is it? Couldn't quite get the client to take sea level rise seriously, which is very unfortunate because it's, in my estimation, quite real. It was very much a topic at the ASLA conference. It's not going away. This is what I mean about clients not being ready to have all of the conversations that you may be ready to have. And then we also were looking at the ecological considerations. We understood that when one added up both sides of the river, there were actually places where the ecological impact could be greatest. And so we were trying to direct the client to have those conversations in certain areas. This ultimately became the area of the wetland habitat, and this became an upland habitat consideration. We had these conversations because green is good, more green is better. Well, maybe more green is better for the bald eagle, but more green may not be better for an urban environment that has to be maintained, cleaned, policed, etc. We were advocating to get a 600-foot width, which through our research, and as imperfect as it is, begins to create desirable habitats for things like the bald eagle. Most of the trail is only 50 feet wide. The parks are actually bigger, and then there are those zones that are even bigger yet. Again, the client wasn't ready to say ecology trumps all. It's really a matter of establishing and defining the client's goals about what this revitalization could look like. What are we bringing back? Well, in the wetland park, not only is it a great place for people, but the idea is it's a great place for the habitat. It's a place where people can go down and be informed about the wetland. It's could be a beautiful place to be, and very engaging, and not something that is readily available to folks in the downtown. So this is just another view across the wetland. Penn's Landing was another place that we looked at more carefully, the boat basin, redoing the existing boat basin, thinking about the activities, the development that could occur around that edge, thinking about Penn's Landing, the miserable place that it is today, and what it could be still as a large gathering place, but something that's more welcoming. This is not a final design. It's a very quick idea of an image that they are then able to use and to hopefully get people excited about moving forward. And then the one piece of land that they do own at the end of Spring Garden is called Festival Pier, is probably one of the first projects that will go forward in its development because they do own that property. It's in public hands. But you can see the project, the thinking about the project does not stop at the waterfront. It's very much tied into, each one of these parks is very much tied into the fabric of the city, and that's what makes it work. Each one of these parks is very different. The ideas behind them are very different. They serve as neighborhood parks, but they're different, and they give different character and identity along the entire waterfront. And then the more upland park and a festival site associated with the old Pico Electric Building. I know I've gone a little bit long, but this really when we think about where we've been, we looked at very local interventions. We looked at interventions that kind of glommed on to some key elements that were within cities. You know, we started looking at the patch and looking at systems and linear systems, and then these more complex systems. I really believe that this is the wave of the future, and I'm not saying that all the projects have to be this big, but even when you're working, if you're interested in residential gardens, you have to be able to have many of these conversations because we are so much more aware of plugging into broader systems. Thank you very much.
Thanks, I think Cynthia would have a little energy left.
Oh, sure. I do. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I have a question. Just terrific presentation. What is your opinion about, I mean, you've shown examples, with a core example where you choreograph activities, program, great detail, and well, I know one of the examples of former designs is the Wagner Park.
Sure.
And I remember as a student, I came there in winter, and then there was nice grass there, was nothing going on. I came there a couple of years ago in the winter, or ice skating all over the place, so 24/7 hour activity, and all year round, no seasons. I mean, where is space for unplanned activities?
Yeah. Okay. That is an interesting question, and okay, so let's just talk a little bit about Bryant Park because we know that it was abysmal at one point, right? It was redesigned, but the physical design alone, in most instances, isn't enough to necessarily carry the day. One of the first things that happened were programs around jazz. They had a jazz series, and they had a movie series, and they had the fashion show. Those were Monday night events or, you know, summer events. Fashion show was tented. That seemed okay because the bulk of the time the park was just the park. Now you go to Bryant Park today and it's a temporary mini mall because of the holiday bazaar that they put in there. The structures are becoming more stable. They're no longer just quaint little tents, but they're more stable. You can eat indoors, you can ice skate. I mean, there's really very little.
Is it still a public space?
Manifestation of park. I agree. And I have problems with what's happened in Bryant Park to that degree. That's me personally. But on the one hand, it is kind of the privatization of public space. It's a perversion of that idea. There's a tipping point for me that when you go beyond that, it doesn't work. I remember I take my class into New York and do a weekend-long tour, and I remember one trip I brought the kids in, and the big circus tent is in Bryant Park. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, is this really the right place for this? Does that make sense? Yeah, I do have issues with that. Especially when it's commercial. You know, it's one thing for festivals, programming. I think that's useful and it's good and people are taking care of a place. The commercial activities are a little hard. Yeah.
It was brilliant lecture. I really enjoyed it tremendously.
You're nice, I like you.
That's right. I hope you do when I get through my questions.
Okay, that beer down.
Yeah, it was really wonderful. But look, a really good lecture inspires
Provokes.
Probably besides somebody who really does well, I always want them to do better, right? Do that with my students all the time. They want to murder me. But anyway, what I was thinking is that the programming aspect, that you have such a wonderful handle on, right? And when you talked about that role of the past and the present and relationship to it, your programming aspect is so sophisticated and so full and so satisfying. I just really, really love it. But we often get students, or in the planning side of our interest and students, is we will get programming, and they include that the programming is the design. But the programming is only part of the design. It took that person who dealt with the traditional aspects of handling the spaces and the media and the edges that created it, right? I just was wondering if you'd comment about that.
Sure. The program is not the design at all. The design needs to respond to the program, but it is not the design. Clearly, something like Fountain Square, you know off the bat that it's not going to be just materials. It's not going to be a lawn space. It's not going to be predominantly green because of the programming demands. You know that. But the design of Fountain Square really has a lot more to do with how it is connected to the urban fabric, how it responds to the streets, how people get into it. It's over an existing parking garage, so respecting that and responding really to the existing conditions. It's also about creating place. So if you get in and kind of break Fountain Square apart, what you realize is, you know, they're groves of trees, and why are the groves of trees there? Well, some of it's social, some of it's framing, but it also is informed by the parking garage underneath and where the depth was for the trees. And so it's much more complicated than the programming. Yeah. That's it.
One of our dilemmas, I think, with a lot of current students is they're often so interested in the social, the economic, the environmental issues in relationship to factors and processes, but very hard for them often to switch over and say, you're merely using those to create your sensibility about materials and space and places to be in. The thing that I would like to move on is this one area that you didn't mention anything on, because resilience is the hot word the last few years, and a really important one, as I briefly mentioned earlier, is the role of social equity in this whole business that comes out of the sustainability triad of environment, work, economy, and social equity. Could you? It's such a painful area, and we have such a hard time addressing it or doing anything about it. But Olmsted was able to address it at his time, and you're obviously addressing it in The Wolf and the Wolf.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think some would say that we're actually addressing it in projects like Fountain Square or Wagner Park before it became overly commercialized.
Yeah.
I've given a series of lectures over the last couple of weeks, and one of them was at the ASLA. It was entitled, "Is Your Firm an Elephant or a Cheetah?" And James Corner was up there, and Adrian Goose, and Pete Walker, and Martha Schwartz. I mean, who else besides me? Somebody else was up there, and one of the questions that came up was, aren't you really talking about gentrification? Okay. So, when you talk about a catalytic resilience or regeneration, are we talking about gentrification? And I think that, to me, is an issue that we feel uncomfortable talking about. That we're all very happy about what these places are doing to revitalize downtowns and cities, but that nobody's excluded from these parks, okay? That's the good news. The bad news is, well, okay, if they have a positive impact on real estate. I mean, there was a time Bryant Park was having a negative impact on real estate. It was seen as a place to avoid, and it was depressing real estate. Well, if it's having a positive effect, what's that doing to true social equity? And I think that that's where the more complex conversations come in, because it's not then just about the park. It's actually about what kind of housing is being permitted adjacent to the park? What are we doing for low-income housing? That to me is a bigger part. One of the conversations that we just started to get into on the Delaware project.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to say one other thing around this. I think some very interesting work is actually going on around the topic of informal settlements. And it's another place where we have a lot to learn. My colleague who I teach with, David Gouvener from Venezuela, his book that he's working on has to do with informal settlements and the power of a civic move through an informal settlement. That's not something that's going to lead to gentrification. That's going to lead to human health and community and well-being. Sometimes these topics are new and we're scratching at those surfaces, and I'm okay with that, as long as we don't turn our head away and talk about it. Yes.
You talked a little bit about in Philadelphia the fact that there were areas where storm and sewer are combined.
Yeah.
That's certainly the case in Boston. Can you talk a little bit about some strategies to address that?
Sure. Actually, Philadelphia Water Department just released an RFP to really undertake and study this entire city from this perspective. They are one of the more innovative water departments in the country, and they are rebuilding streets with green infrastructure. One of the things that's going to happen is that people who have massive impervious surface, like big boxes and parking lots, are going to be hit the hardest with a tax. You either do something about the stormwater or you pay a tax. That's what's happening in that regard. This initiative that's coming out of Philadelphia, this project that's coming out of Philadelphia, is actually going to be looking at the city on many different scales. What's going on in the industrial world, what's going on in the big box world, what's going on in the streets, what's going on in residential use. So it's really taking a deeper look at many of those issues.
So it's really approaching the problem from the quantity, the demand side.
And quality, yes, both. Yeah. Yes.
You talked a little bit about kind of negotiating the hierarchy of the client's desires and needs.
Yes.
And how sometimes things that you thought were important kind of got brushed under the cover. But I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about any example, but for example, like creating the microclimates with the plantings in San Francisco. And was that seen by the clients as desirable? Like, did they put value in that, or did they kind of say, well, we love your design, so plant what you think you should plant to create whatever you want to create? Kind of, how do you approach, like, expanding maybe their idea of what they even want?
Remember, you don't always have to proselytize. Sometimes you can do things on your projects that you don't have to convert the client, everything you do. We had a project where we were very concerned about ecology. It was a ranch, and that was not the client's concern. But we were able to provide the product for the project and meet our agenda, our other agenda, the one that we felt was socially responsible. I think this is a judgment call. I really do. You know, I did say on one side of my mouth that you need to be an advocate, and I think it's important that we are advocates and that we try to have these conversations. Sometimes when they're not received well, it's okay. Back up, assess, well, can I still accomplish this, and just not talk about it. That happens sometimes. And I think it's okay. part of the evolution. Not everybody's at the same place. We've actually come to a place around these topics of sustainability, where we believe that one of the first conversations we need to be having with clients now is to do a goal session with them. Let's get clear on what your goals are for sustainability. That's becoming increasingly important because that helps us know where we can be most effective in directing our conversations with them. Anybody else? Don't be shy. Thank you.